We were going to start a campaign with our friends, and I wanted to paint all the characters. And you said that you wanted to paint yours. I didn't say anything, but to be honest, I felt a little bit of hesitation because I was like, oh, one of them's not going to look like the rest of them.
Welcome to the Hobby Hangout with Asu and Dave.
Today's episode, should you hobby with your family?
Some aspects of tabletop gaming are usually done as an individual activity, and you still find the time to do it as an individual activity, and also have found it as an opportunity to share that experience and passion with the rest of the family for quality time. So, first of all, why do you hobby?
So when I'm talking about the current topic, which is tabletop miniatures and hobbying, the aspects of that include building the miniatures, painting the miniatures, sometimes creating terrain and the table itself where you're going to game, and then the actual gaming aspect. So for me, the hobby portion of the building, the painting, the creating of the tables, that aspect has a bit of that, to me personally, that mental health and well-being aspect to it. It's almost meditative at times, just being able to focus and clear your mind, be creative. Painting can be very relaxing, especially after a long day of work, stressful times. um, and just having that as a creative release for me helps, I think, with mental health in general, just putting me in that calm state of mind and able to leverage that calmness and stability, I guess, in other aspects of my life.
And so in the past, I remember that it was very much you time only. And now with the kids, I find them usually with you when they're awake, painting and, like things like that. So, how did it used to be in the past? Like when I refer to you doing it as an individual hobby, just tell me about it.
Yeah, and I think it's probably the norm. It's just how that hobby itself is, I guess, adopted and acted upon as individuals when they get into it. You know, you have your rule sets that you need to read through. Obviously, it's typically a very me or individual activity of having to read the rules. Building the miniatures is an individual activity typically where you've got your box of miniatures and you're clipping it apart and putting it together, following the instructions. Ideally, you've got this vision of how you want it to look on the table. So you're the one coming up with the scheme and then you're the one painting it. So again, it's all sort of that individual perspective on how you get your creative mindset and translate it into reality, into these armies or whatever is composing this game that you're playing, and bring it to the table. So a lot of that is just you, right? It's you interacting with the medium on the table. So, and again, there's just that's just how the hobby is traditionally, and that's how I got started in it. You know, you buy your box set, you bring it home, you find some space, and you get to work on it. If anyone in the family, you know, parents, brothers, sisters see this, it probably looks like work to them. A bunch of instructions on how to put together all these tiny little pieces. The fact that you have to clean all the pieces so that they're nice and smooth from any mold lines, and sometimes you need to wash them to get rid of any release agents from the mold process. So it can be very consuming just to put the figures together. Then once they're put together, you know, you've got to prime them and paint them and then base them. So it's a lot of work, and anyone that observes this can see it as a lot of work. But when you're doing it yourself, I think it is very, at least I've always found it very relaxing, and a creative release, as I mentioned.
And so, how has it changed in terms of making the time to hobby? How has it changed from when you were single to now that you have two kids?
Yeah. So I think one aspect I wanted to speak to is how I first started trying to identify time for me to hobby, right? So I know we tried looking at setting a schedule. So obviously, we want to ensure, as a healthy relationship, we're spending quality time with each other, and just looking at, what days of the week after, we're done work or and done dinner, which days I would spend some time painting after in the evenings, right? And at that point, I was still very much treating it as an individual activity. So I'd sort of allocate a certain number of hours on one night a week, and I'd go downstairs to my desk. Again, it's always also very separated because, there's you need space for your paints and brushes and everything like that. So it ends up being very isolated, at least in my experience, and just having that separation within the house, where I'm focused and in my own personal space, and then sort of leaving you to do your own thing at that point in time. Uh, I guess how did you find that experience?
Yeah, I will say that I know best when it's your time to go to bed. No, I'm just kidding. I do like going to sleep early. And David is not like that. He likes to stay up late. And so I also like to go to sleep with him. It just I don't know, like it feels weird to just go to sleep by myself. So at some point it didn't feel like I was enjoying it too much. Then once we got into better routines, I think with the kids, because when they're younger, sometimes they're waking up throughout the night. And so
Yeah,
you want to make sure that you go to sleep as soon as you can and get as much sleep as possible. And so now that we have a better routine, that they're a little bit older, I started doing some other things like grabbing a book and reading. Or the other one that I've been trying to convince him to join me is to watch some reality TV. Um, who was it that you mentioned? Was it Maniac?
Maniac,
Maniac,
yeah,
sorry.
Maniac, and Love Island. That's the show you watch, right?
That's not the show that I
No,
watch,
oh,
but
okay,
it's
or Love Is Blind, something that you watch. Yeah. But it sounded very similar to me the way he explained it.
yeah. Okay,
Yes,
so
yes,
summary
exactly.
is
Yeah,
that at first I didn't quite understand it. It felt more like you didn't want to spend time with me, but really was just you wanted to have that personal time for
yeah,
you to feel better. And it gave me the opportunity to find also activities for me to do and entertain myself.
yeah. Um, so from that aspect, though, as you mentioned, I looked at opportunities on how to expand that. Now, to your point, I still hobby by myself, so I still wake up early in the mornings, a couple of days a week, and if I don't have anything else to do at that point in time, I'll come down and paint for maybe half an hour or 40 minutes before everyone else is up. Um, as you mentioned, I'm an early riser and a bit of a night owl. I don't stay up that late, but
It's late
you
for me.
yes. And, I'll find even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes, maybe I'll paint a little bit here or there, or build something and put it together. But as our kids were getting older and I noticed that they definitely showed interest in what I was doing, I kind of started experimenting with, okay, how do I share? Because I obviously get a lot of enjoyment out of this hobby. How do I start sharing that with my family and see if they enjoy it as well? um, so how do I start incorporating certain things with my kids and my wife, and find that shared enjoyment together? So there's a couple of different things we did. So one of them last year we actually painted the entire Kickstarter of Zombicide, Dead or Alive.
We do,
We did that
yes.
together. We took it upon ourselves that we were gonna paint everything in well, all the
We didn't paint
zombies.
all of
We didn't paint all the heroes,
it.
but we painted all the zombies, all the abominations, and a couple of heroes. Um, but we definitely put the time in and we did that together. And also at that same time, I took it as an opportunity to introduce you to the new, because you hadn't painted in a while, to introduce you to new paints called speed paints. I don't think you particularly like them. I think you still like the acrylics,
I
right?
think that they're not as forgiving as the acrylic. Just not having the precision to paint, I think it just gets a little bit darker and you can't correct it as easily. My experience was, but it was interesting to try it, right? Like it promised me
Yeah.
a quick job. It wasn't. Again, it just didn't work for me based on my experience, but it was fun to experience something different too.
Yeah. um, so now we can, I guess, get into your story. Maybe we'll start there with your Arcadia quest.
Yes. So so for me, the visual aspect of any game is important. And I really like looking at my characters in a way that speaks to me. So when we started our campaign of Arcadia Quest with our kids and we picked our characters, I'm looking at the cards to pick which characters I'm gonna have because I'm not looking at the skills. I'm looking at how do they visually look like. And so then you bring the models out and they're all gray. And so it just doesn't speak to me the same way that the card did. And so I said, well, you know what? Before we start playing, why don't we paint them? And the kids got very excited and we all started painting our characters. Now we actually started playing the game before, but it was really hard to find our characters. And as we got, because we had like 3 characters each. So as we got the one painted, we were like, oh, this looks so good. Let's keep going with the other ones. And the kids being so proud of how they were able to paint their miniatures and looking like the cards. And,
Yeah.
it just makes the game more enjoyable. And so, because I wanted it to be enjoyable for me, I dedicated that time to actually sit down with you. I remember like we will bring, um, you will put on some music
Yeah.
or a show in like just for background noise. I will bring my cup of tea downstairs with you. We will be sitting back to back.
At that point, it was back to back. Since then, I decided to shift my office around so that
Yeah, so we can go
we
side
could
to side.
actually sit next to each other. But yeah, at that point, yeah, the configuration wasn't ideal, so we had to sit back to back, unfortunately. But
And I mean, that is a much better way to spend our time than watching TV.
yeah, I thought
Because,
so.
yeah, because even though TV could be entertaining, you're just sitting together, but you're not interacting. And with painting, even though we're focused on our own uh, miniature, once in a while we go like, oh, like, can you check this one out? Or I don't know what to do with this. Or just simply whatever we're listening to, then it prompts a
Yeah,
short conversation, right? And so I think that interaction, the balance of the interaction with the doing was pretty good.
yeah. And for me, seeing that similar enjoyment out of the hobby that I get, like when you finish your miniature and showing it to me, asking me to take pictures of it, right? You're you're proud of your accomplishments, and
Yeah.
I feel the same thing. Like when I finish something and I like it, I'm proud of it. So being able to see that coming from you, able to see that from my kids, it's being able to see them enjoying it in a similar fashion as myself. And I guess maybe I'll back up before I get into another example. Now, as miniature hobbyists, I know we typically have mountains of figures that we collect that we're hoping to paint one day because we see the box art and it looks amazing, it looks cool. We hope to capture our own vision for it. We want it to be perfect and see our creative elements displayed on these figures, right? And to be honest, it can be tough to give that to somebody else to paint. So
Especially
as an
someone inexperienced.
so as an example, Massive Darkness, right? We were going to start a campaign with our friends, and I wanted to paint all the characters. I'm not saying I'm some amazing painter, but I do feel
You
like I
are
have
very good.
yes, I do feel like I have a good level of skill. So I was painting all the figures, and you said that you wanted to paint yours.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I didn't say anything, but to be honest, I felt a little bit of hesitation because I was like, oh, one of them's not going to look like the rest of them. But then I was like, you know what? That's perfectly fine. You're going to enjoy it. It's going to be your character. You're going to have that connection and ownership to it, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say
This is news to me,
yeah.
by the way.
What I'm trying to say to listeners is as much as, you've invested the money to buy the miniatures, it's okay to release some of that control, especially to incorporate others into your hobby and get them to enjoy it. And realistically, you're probably never going to paint everything that you have. I know I'm probably never going to paint everything I have. And at the end of the day, it's just paint. You can definitely strip it off. You can reprime it. You can repaint it. Uh,
Are you going to repaint
no, I'm not going to
I
repaint
did a good job,
yours.
right?
So I guess what I'm trying to get at is don't or try not to be as restrictive and like claiming ownership of and hoarding, I guess, of your plastic miniatures, right? The best way to get others to enjoy your hobby is to use what you have rather than going out to buy more. If you have the figures there and you have someone that's expressing interest, let them paint them. At a very minimum, you're cutting down on your pile of shame or your backlog of work, right? So yeah, so from that massive darkness example, I gave you the I didn't give it to you, but
You allowed me to paint my own miniature.
I didn't restrict you from taking that character and painting it. And it turned out great. And we all based them the same, so we still had that theme. Even though they didn't look exactly the same, they didn't look out of place either,
Mhm.
right? So they still are in the setting, and there's no telling from a distance, there's no real telling or standing out from what you're playing. It's all incorporated on the table and it's got paint on it, so it's better than being great.
Yeah. I do remember I feel like I had to involve you with the eyes or the mouth. Yes, the mouth,
The
because
mouth,
I
yeah.
it ended up being like a Ronald McDonald kind of mouth. So I did need your help on that.
Yeah.
But I think that overall the rest of the paint was very well done
Yep.
for for my standards.
Um, and then with the kids, so I took a couple of different approaches. One was with my daughter because she was older as we started getting into her, or as I started getting her into painting miniatures. So she was trying to do a little more detail, trying to understand how to layer and highlight and things like that. Obviously, we weren't getting too complex, but I took a more structured approach where I decided, okay, I told her about Warcry. It was a smaller game. You had specific your squad of characters. So she picked one out, and then we slowly painted through that unit. I think it was 9 or 12 people. Whereas my son, who was younger, he was very much interested in painting as well, but being of a younger age, he obviously had a different vision of what he was trying to paint, and he was going through it so fast too. There, obviously, I couldn't keep up with just buying miniatures, so I took the approach of okay, looking at my backlog of miniatures and what realistically would I never paint, and just having that honest conversation with myself, right? As much as I liked all of the figures and hoping that one day I'll paint them, just being honest with myself and saying, which ones will I never paint? So I looked at like the Game of Thrones game that I had. You know, some of the units you had duplicates of, some of them had captains and extra models. So I pulled those out, primed those up. I looked at a Kickstarter miniature game that I had purchased several years ago. It's no longer really backed, and some of the miniatures were nice, and I incorporated them in other armies. But the general figures themselves, I knew I was probably never going to paint them, so I primed those up and built them. And then it so happened one of my friends had I think it was an Eldar army that was an older army, and he wasn't really doing anything with it anymore. I told him that my son was interested, so he gave me all of these used figures as well. So I primed them all, and he has a mountain of figures.
Now he
uh,
has his own backlog.
yes, yeah. Well, that's the thing. So he's paints them. He's painted a lot of them. He's gone through that backlog very quickly. But I also let him use speed paints, which are very thin paint. So actually, once he painted a bunch of them and he was looking for more figures, I was actually just able to take a bunch of them and just reprime them again. Because the speed paints are so thin, they didn't take away any of the details. So I just reprimed a bunch of them and he had a whole bunch of miniatures to paint again. Um, so that unstructured approach of just letting him paint however he wants has translated into him having some surprising brush control.
He is
At a
better than
very
me
young
sometimes.
age, yes.
Most of the time.
Just allowing him to experiment with colors and go nuts on all these different figures. Now, when I give him a figure, I'll be like, okay, what color do you want the cloth to be, the weapon, the skin, where he'll make now decisions on them and then he'll paint it. Uh,
Yeah, 'cause I remember
yeah.
before he would just pick whatever, like, 2 colors that he liked, and it was, like, all over the model. And now he's actually distinguishing the different parts of the model and painting them
Yeah.
accordingly.
And I think just because realistically, that's all you need is to be, to, in my perspective, yes, you need other things, but the biggest thing that you can do to get to be a better painter is just practice
Mhm.
because you're going to gain that brush control. And it surprised me, like just just because he's probably painted well over 100 models at this point. And now when I see him grab a miniature for his age, it's just the level of brush control where he can paint certain things. I imagine when he gets older, he's going to be a far more accomplished painter than I am. um, but it makes me proud to see that, right? So just seeing that shared passion as well. Um, and then we also did, because he saw my daughter with her war cry army, so I decided I'd get him a war cry army as well, or a squad. And we went with a smaller squad, so it was only 6 figures. So the one of the benefits of speed paint is when you're acting very quickly, you can wash it off very easily too if you don't allow it to dry. So what I did is I told him, okay, what we're going to do is pick a portion of it. You're going to paint it. And I said, try to be careful, but don't worry if you get it on other areas. When you finish painting one model, you pass that to me and then you grab the next one. And what I'll do is with a wet, just with water, I'll clean off on other areas. So I wasn't taking away from his ability of painting, right? He's still painting the miniature. I'm not painting any part of it. All I'm going to do is assist with cleaning up some of the stuff that gets onto other areas that he
Mhm.
doesn't want a certain color. Um, so we did that together. It was a shared experience together, and we did it over a couple of days. And I really like the way the miniatures turned out. He did a really good job. Again, he picked the colors. He painted the areas, selected which areas would be red, which would be, teal and metal and gold. And he put the work in to paint it all. And I think his favorite part was basing them. He loves basing
Oh,
figures.
yeah?
um, I think it's that the little, because I have like mixed blends, right? So they have dirt and grass and
Mhm.
little flock and stuff already there. So he loves basing figures. I think he just, from what I see in his face, I think he interprets it as being real now.
Yeah. It does look very real. I
Yeah.
remember when I did mine for Warhammer all these years ago, um, it gives it a much different look. Like the final product when you have it properly based is way different. It's like you can actually see it
Yes.
happening, right? As if it was a real battle. Um, so what other changes have you made in terms of making this a shared experience with your family?
Um, I think the games itself is
Mhm.
another aspect. So typically after I've built my armies, I would try and find someone to play with at the hobby store, right? So we'll see if there's an upcoming tournament, see if there's anyone in the community that's free on certain days, and then go to the store and play there. Now, I'm not saying that that's a bad experience. That's definitely still a great experience, and you get to meet new people and experience the games. But obviously, these games take time, time to play, and you don't always know who you're going to play with and whether or not it's going to be an enjoyable experience. So having that opportunity to do the games with someone I know and I know I'm going to have fun with is another benefit to myself and to the family. But yes, being able to game in our home, one being Star Wars Shatterpoint, gaming with my daughter. We've started doing that, and she's obviously old enough to understand the rule sets, understand the strategy, so we play the full games. They do take longer than I think it would take with like an adult, because obviously she doesn't have a full grasp of all of it, but she has a very good understanding of the strategy, but she can take time to execute her turns. So sometimes we'll have to play it over days and just taking breaks in between. So that's one way that I enjoy the games. The other way is with my son and being sort of more of an unstructured gameplay. So for Warcry in particular, we have the boards, we painted all the terrain, we have our painted units. And what I'll typically do is we'll pull out the board, we put up the terrain, we take out dice, and then we just make up our own rules. Sometimes we'll put tokens on the board and he'll say, you have to collect these ones. Sometimes we just say, oh, you have to fight. And literally, there's nothing going on that makes any logic half the time. He'll say, oh, this guy can move 6 inches. And if I roll this dice, he's going to jump across a table. And it's just fun. It's just creative fun, I find. So we just jump around, attacking each other's, saying you have to climb to this terrain piece and blow the horn to win the level. And it usually doesn't last more than 20 to 30 minutes. And then we're done. And he always has a blast doing it. And then he's ready to go the next time we want to pull it out. So it's that ability to share that gaming experience in different ways, right? One is enjoying the actual game, and the other is just enjoying the components and free play sort of thing.
I just remember something. There were some years ago. That particular, if you're watching us on YouTube, there's behind us this terrain structure. I remember I helped you paint that one some years ago. That was actually quite fun. It was different from doing miniatures because it wasn't as small. And I learned about dry brushing, and I was like, "Wow, this looks so cool!" And then just like putting plants and stuff in there, that was pretty fun. I think that terrain building could be another thing that you could do with the kids at some
Yes.
point. Um, but now you mentioned, for example, using your miniatures that are in your backlog as something that you can share that, you already have it, you already paid for it. You can give it to your kids to practice. What about the brushes? Because when I have joined him, I know that he has a special set of brushes that he does not share with me. So tell me how you go about sharing your tools.
Yes. Yeah. So obviously, especially with kids, you don't want to be giving them your most expensive tools and paint and things like that. Don't give them your Kolinsky Sable paintbrushes. Absolutely, it's perfectly fine for them to be starting with synthetic brushes. And you
Kids
can,
and wife.
yeah. And I guess for any painter, it's ideally you're starting with synthetic brushes. I don't think you need to go out and buy the most expensive things to start in any hobby. And just starting with synthetics, you can get them cheap from art stores or anywhere really. Cheap set. You don't need to get huge or tiny, tiny brushes. I think just starting with sort of that 0 to 2 size is more than enough for most painters. And realistically, probably even go sticks to the larger ones, like the size 2 brushes, because I think the ability to cover more of the miniature will speed up the process and ensure that they're not getting bored or aggravated or frustrated to start
Well,
before they get
actually,
into the details.
there was a very good episode that we watched on Miniacs channel, right? Where there was a challenge of him and his wife
Yes.
doing like expensive tools versus cheap ones, I
Yeah.
guess. So we'll link it if you want to watch it. We'll put it in the description. But so, yeah, so you mentioned, right, like you are going to share the ones that are necessary to learn, but not necessarily the ones that are the most expensive ones.
Absolutely, yeah. And the more you can remove the the friction to starting the hobby, because I think obviously building is part of the hobby, but I don't think it's the funnest part of the hobby. So ideally, I would suggest not introducing your kids or your spouse or partner to that aspect of it from the start. Make the effort, clean the miniatures, prime them, and get them ready for them, and have them enjoy the painting aspect first, because I think that's the funnest part, at least from my experience.
When did you learn this? Because I remember I had to clean my
Yes,
Demonettes.
yeah. because that was introducing you into the wargaming experience as a whole.
I remember I was very excited about the demonettes the way that I saw them in the book. Then you get them, and it's a very small box, and I'm like, "How are the models fitting in here?" Then you open it up, and it's like just, like flat, what are they called? Like cheap
Sprues.
spruce?
Yeah.
Okay. And tiny pieces, not even the whole one. It was just tiny pieces everywhere. I was like, "What?" Um, and then, like cutting them. I remember I was so scared of cutting them out of there because they're made to be cut with tools, not with your hand. You
Yeah.
don't just snap them off. And then after that, when you said that I needed to clean them, and I was like, clean what? I don't see anything. So it, like, to my eye, I was like, this looks perfectly fine. What do I have to clean? But yeah, as I started getting into it, I noticed the
Yeah.
difference. But it, yeah, I mean, you probably learn from that. You learn your lesson.
Yeah. But yeah, just keeping it simple. Again, use what paints you have. Don't go out and buy a brand new set of paints. Just leverage what you have. And same with like how you do it, in terms of how you provide them the miniatures. In my instance, I do have a lot of painting handles, but I've also just cut a bunch of wooden dowels to be able to stick the miniatures on there and make it a little easier for my kids to hold as they're painting. I know you're not a fan of
No.
them. You still like the claw and holding the base.
Yes. Even when I have cramps after I'm done.
You gotta practice more. It's good for you.
No, I just gotta do your exercises with the fingers.
Um, but yeah, I don't think getting back to the question, I don't think you need to try and spend money to get enjoyment out of it when you're introducing new people to that aspect of the hobby. Definitely leverage what you have. Uh, it is good to get them their own set of paintbrushes, I do believe. Even if they're not the most expensive, it's just having their own set of paintbrushes will allow them to paint however they want to. You don't have to worry, especially with kids, because they're going to either forget to wash them and then the brushes are going to dry up and you'll have to throw them out. Get too much paint on them and, get into the ferrule and then the hairs are just going to splay out. Um, or just be way too rough with the brushes at the start until they understand. Um, and just bend the hairs and everything. So definitely get them their own brushes to start and let them have the freedom to experiment and learn how to use that paintbrush themselves. And that way you're not stressing over how they're handling the tools.
Now, if we go back to the question at the beginning of the episode, should you hobby with your family? What is your opinion?
Yes, absolutely. As you mentioned, I still find time to do some hobbying on my own when I want that focused, or if I'm painting something for a competition, or just something that I want to dedicate time and concentrate on. So I'll still find time to do that, absolutely. But the ability to share that experience and now share that passion with others in my family means I get to enjoy it more myself as well, selfishly, right? But at the same time, I see the enjoyment that they get out of the same hobby. And we can now experience the same thing in the house. Again, not that we don't like going out, but we have that ability to experience and enjoy the games on our own. We don't need to go out and constantly look for someone that's going to play the game, or if they don't have an army, are they willing to try the game? It just gives you a little bit more accessibility to enjoy your hobby.
And flexibility, right?
Yeah.
Like whenever you feel like doing it, you go and do it without having to book it and put it in the schedule.
Yes. And funny enough, I know my brothers are both, I think, peaking more. They've looked at it in the past and never really got it into it. But I think the more they see me like painting more, and the reason I'm painting more is because I have the opportunity to do it with the family. I'm not just doing it on my own. But I think they're seeing that, and I know they've been asking about, where should they get started? What should they do? So just getting that interest within your close network, I think builds that ability to hobby better.
And then from my perspective, even though my main hobby is not to, do miniature painting or building terrain, I'm more like a result oriented, like when I need it, I will do it and I will enjoy it. But I think that from my perspective, seeing how the kids really enjoy doing that, like during the weekend, sometimes they will be like, "Oh, I want to paint," and they spend quite some time actually painting. Like it's like a whole hour that it goes into there, and they feel like it's as much value as playing with toys, for example. And so, and like instead of doing other things like just sitting in front of the TV, just if they're creating something and using their creativity, and storytelling too, right? Like when they're actually playing the games, even when they're made up games, I think that that's great for me to see in my kids.
Yeah, I mean, my son has a giant tote now full of miniatures that he's painted. And this gaming table that I built here, I'll pull out some of the terrain sometimes, pull out his bin, and him and his sister will literally just make up their own games. The
Hmm.
ability, because it's different, I think, from playing toys with something you've purchased versus playing with something on a table with the pieces you've painted,
Hmm.
you've created yourself, and being able to play with them, right? I think that's something that we as adults that are playing these tabletop miniature wargamings kind of envision in our heads, right? We've created these armies and we're having these battles and enacting what we've imagined on the table.
Hmm.
And just seeing my kids being able to do that on their own is fun.
Yeah. Okay, well, we would love to hear what you all think. Did you already hobby with your family? How did you get into it? Or, is it something that maybe you're going to give it a try?
You should.
You should just to try it, right? If you
Yeah.
don't like it, then that's fine. At least you tried it.
Yeah.
And I mean, the takeaway is communication in terms of knowing that you don't want to share your brushes. No, I'm just kidding. Um, but yeah, I think, yeah, just getting your family involved. And I think that one of the most important things for if your family is not part of your hobby yet is to get them to see what it does for you, right? When they can see how valuable it is for you, how it makes you feel good, how it makes you feel distressed. Um, I think that we value that in our relationships. We want people that we love to, have something that is making them feel at peace with them within themselves. So I think that just trying to get to understand that better. If they don't understand it, I think that it's a good opportunity to communicate it and maybe get them interested to share it with you.
Absolutely. All right. I think that brings us to the end of this episode.
It does.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.